Welcome back to the flickering light, friends. Draw nearer to the warmth of our campfire, for tonight we journey not into a realm of monsters or curses, but into the heart of ancient healing. Before we delve into the intricate world of papyrus scrolls and potent herbs, please take a moment to subscribe to Campfire Night Stories. And, if this tale casts its spell upon you, a simple like helps us keep these ancient fires burning for future journeys. Tonight, we step back thousands of years to a land of golden sands and colossal monuments, where life and death were seen through the eyes of both science and faith. We will walk in the sandals of a man of wisdom, a healer, as we explore a day in the life of an ancient Egyptian doctor. Part 1. The Dawn Rituals. The first blush of dawn painted the eastern sky in hues of rose and saffron, yet Imhotep was already awake. His small dwelling, nestled amongst the bustling alleys of Memphis, was still cool from the desert night. But the air already carried the faint, sweet scent of the Nile, a promise of the heat to come. He rose from his simple reed mat, his aged limbs moving with practiced ease, a testament to a life of measured discipline. First, the ritual cleansing. He poured cool water from a clay jar over his hands and face, murmuring ancient blessings to the goddess Taweret. She was the protector of childbirth, of homes, and of healing, a benevolent hippopotamus spirit. Then, the meticulous scraping of his tongue with a thin copper tool, a practice he knew aided in both health and clear thought. His eyes, sharp despite his many years, scanned his small, ordered room. Clay pots held dried herbs, pungent senna, fragrant frankincense, bitter wormwood. A small, intricately carved wooden chest contained his most precious instruments. Bronze scalpels, bone probes, and linen bandages, all polished to a gleaming, sterile sheen. He donned his simple white linen kilt, freshly laundered and starched. Cleanliness, he often reminded his apprentices, was the first barrier against the unseen spirits of sickness. These were not just physical spirits, but the very essence of decay and ill health. He broke his fast with a simple meal, a piece of unleavened bread, softened dates, and a cup of date wine. It was a light meal, designed to prepare the body for the long, demanding day ahead. As the sun, Ra, began its slow ascent, casting long shadows across the dusty streets, Imhotep offered his morning prayers. He invoked Thoth, the ibis-headed god of knowledge, writing, and wisdom, for guidance and steady hands. And Sekhmet, the lioness goddess of healing and destruction, for both the power to cure and the strength to understand the inevitability of fate. For a true physician, he believed, understood both life and the shadow it cast. Part 2. The House of Life. By the time the sun had fully cleared the eastern horizon, Imhotep was walking through the awakening streets of Memphis. The city was a symphony of sounds, the braying of donkeys, the cries of street vendors, the distant rumble of stone barges on the Nile. His destination was the Per Ankh, the House of Life, a temple complex dedicated to learning, writing, and, most importantly, medicine. It was here that the accumulated wisdom of generations of healers was stored on countless papyrus scrolls. Here, new generations of physicians were trained. The air within the Per Ankh was cool and still, carrying the scent of papyrus, incense, and dried herbs. Scribes hunched over tables, copying ancient texts with meticulous precision. Apprentices, younger men and women eager to learn the sacred craft, moved with purposeful silence. Imhotep made his way to his personal chamber, a small room lined with shelves of scrolls and clay tablets. He unrolled a freshly copied section of the Edwin Smith papyrus, an ancient text on surgery and trauma. His fingers traced the hieroglyphs, each one a window into centuries of medical observation. Observe the injury. Feel for swelling. Ask the patient how it occurred. The words echoed with timeless wisdom, reminding him of the importance of empirical study. He spent the first hour reviewing complex cases from the previous day, discussing them with senior colleagues. There was the matter of the fisherman with a spear wound to the arm, a deep gash that required careful suturing. And the young child suffering from the worm of the anus, a common ailment treated with enemas of natron and oil. The House of Life was a place of constant learning, a living library where knowledge was not just preserved, but actively debated and refined. They believed that the body was a vessel, and that its ailments were disruptions of the natural order. Whether caused by malevolent spirits, imbalances of the humors, or simply the harsh realities of daily life. Imhotep's gaze drifted to a set of anatomical drawings on a clay tablet depicting the intricate network of veins and arteries. Their understanding of the human body was profound, built upon centuries of observation, and, controversially, from the practice of mummification. They saw the body as a map, each organ a landmark on the journey from life to the afterlife. This journey, however, was often fraught with illness and pain, and it was their sacred duty to guide their patients through it. Part 3. The Morning Clinic. The morning sun began to bake the limestone walls of the courtyard, signaling the start of the public clinic. Imhotep took his place on a stone bench, shaded by a canopy of thick woven palm leaves. Outside the gates of the House of Life, a line of patients had already begun to form, a cross-section of Egyptian society. The first to approach was a stonemason, his hands rough and calloused from years of working the quarries of Tura. He held his right arm gingerly, his face tight with a pain that he tried, with stoic pride, to hide. Imhotep gestured for the man to sit, his eyes already scanning the limb for signs of trauma. A heavy block of limestone had shifted, the man explained, crushing his forearm against a wooden lever. Imhotep's fingers, surprisingly gentle for their age, probed the swelling, feeling for the telltale grind of broken bone. The bone is splintered, but not yet broken through the skin, Imhotep noted to an apprentice standing nearby. He ordered a mixture of flour, honey, and splints made from the sturdy midrib of a palm leaf. Honey was his most trusted ally, a gift from the gods that kept the breath of decay away from open wounds. He set the bone with a swift, practiced motion that made the mason grunt in agony, then bound it tightly in linen. "You must rest this arm until the moon has completed its cycle," he commanded, though he knew the man's family relied on his daily labor. Next came a weaver, her eyes red and weeping from the constant dust and fine fibers of the linen loom. For her, Imhotep prescribed a wash made from copper salts mixed with the crushed seeds of a specific desert plant. He applied the cooling liquid with a soft feather, whispering a prayer to Isis to restore the woman's sight. In the heat of the morning, he treated toothaches by packing cavities with a paste of ground incense and garlic. He drained abscesses with bronze lancets, his movements steady despite the flies that buzzed around the metallic scent of blood. Every patient was a puzzle, a combination of physical symptoms and spiritual unrest. He did not just treat the body, he listened to their stories, for he knew that the mind often carried the heaviest burdens of disease. As the hours passed, the weight of his responsibility felt as heavy as the sun beating down on the Nile Valley. But he did not falter, for he was a swan, a physician, a title that meant the one who knows. Part 4. The Market's Maladies. By midday, the heat had become a physical presence, a shimmering veil that hung over the city of Memphis. Imhotep left the relative calm of the House of Life to venture into the chaotic heart of the central marketplace. He needed to replenish his stock of rare ingredients that did not grow within the temple gardens. The market was a sensory explosion. The smell of roasting meat, the pungent aroma of dried fish, and the sweet perfume of imported spices. But Imhotep's trained eyes saw more than the vibrant colors and the bustling trade. He saw the water carriers with their stooped backs and the telltale signs of parasitic worms in their distended bellies. He saw the street children with the pale, scurvy-ridden gums that came from a diet of nothing but stale bread and beer. He stopped at a stall run by a merchant from the southern lands of Punt, a man whose skin was the color of dark ebony. They bartered over a small bag of myrrh and a jar of rare black cumin oil, a potent remedy for digestive distress. "The ships are late this season," the merchant grumbled. "The Red Sea is restless, and the desert winds are harsh." Imhotep nodded, knowing that a delay in trade meant a shortage of medicine for his most critical patients. As he walked, he observed a group of workers drinking from a stagnant canal, their faces shadowed by fatigue. He felt a pang of frustration, for he knew that the very water they drank was the source of the heavy sickness that plagued the slums. He stopped to speak with a local overseer, urging him to ensure the wells were cleaned before the next flood of the Nile. The official listened with polite boredom, more concerned with the quota of mud bricks than the health of the laborers. In the market, Imhotep was not just a healer, but a witness to the harsh realities of life in the shadows of the pyramids. He saw how the poor suffered in silence, their bodies broken by the very land they worked so hard to cultivate. He purchased a bundle of dried willow bark, knowing that its bitter tea could cool the fires of a lingering fever. With his satchel heavy with herbs and his heart heavy with the sights of the city, he began the long walk back. The sun was at its zenith, and the city seemed to hold its breath in the overwhelming brilliance of Ra's light. Part 5. The Noble's Ailment. In the early afternoon, a messenger arrived at the House of Life, panting from a hurried run through the heat. The high steward of the king's granaries, a man of immense wealth and influence, was in great distress. Imhotep was summoned immediately, for the steward was a man whose health was vital to the stability of the city's food supply. The steward's villa was a world away from the dusty markets, a paradise of lush gardens, cooling pools, and shaded porticos. The air here was filled with the scent of lotus flowers and the gentle tinkling of water from stone fountains. Imhotep was led into a private chamber where the steward lay on a bed of ebony and ivory, his face pale and glistening with sweat. He complained of a burning in the chest and a heaviness that felt like a great stone resting upon his heart. He was a man of excess, his body soft from a life of fine wines, fatty meats, and little physical exertion. Imhotep felt the man's pulse, noting its irregular, fluttering rhythm, a sign of a heart struggling to maintain its pace. "The vessels of your heart are clouded," Imhotep explained, using the terminology of the ancient papyri. He knew that the steward's lifestyle was his own worst enemy, yet he spoke with the diplomacy required for a man of such status. He prescribed a strict diet of bitter greens, boiled fish, and a decoction made from the leaves of the digitalis-like foxglove. He also ordered a series of ritual purgings to rid the body of the excess humors that were clogging his spirit. The steward's wife, adorned in gold and fine linen, hovered nearby, her eyes wide with a fear that wealth could not appease. "Will he survive the night, great healer?" she whispered, her voice trembling like a reed in the wind. "The gods are the masters of the breath," Imhotep replied carefully, "but we will provide the vessel for their mercy." He spent the next few hours by the steward's side, monitoring his breathing and administering cooling compresses. He saw the fear in the powerful man's eyes, a reminder that even the closest friends of the pharaoh were mortal. In this quiet, opulent room, the doctor was the only one who held the truth, a burden he carried with silent dignity. Part 6. The Evening Preparations. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, the sky over Memphis turned to a deep, bruised purple. Imhotep returned to the Perank, his body weary but his mind still sharp and focused on the tasks ahead. The evening was not a time for rest, but for the meticulous preparation of the medicines that would be needed for the morrow. In the laboratory of the House of Life, the air was thick with the scent of simmering oils and ground minerals. Apprentices were busy at stone mortars, their rhythmic grinding sounding like the heartbeat of the temple itself. Imhotep oversaw the creation of a complex salve for skin ulcers, a mixture of lead ore, honey, and the fat of a water bird. He watched closely as the ingredients were blended, for he knew that the wrong proportions could turn a cure into a corrosive poison. "The measure must be exact," he whispered to a young student, "for the body is a balance that we must not tip." He then moved to the storage jars, selecting dried poppy capsules that would be used to create a draught for those in terminal pain. Opium was a powerful and dangerous gift from the earth, one that he used only when the shadow of the Great Sleep was already visible. During these quiet hours, Imhotep also fulfilled his duty to the House of the Dead, the embalming workshops nearby. While he was primarily a healer of the living, a physician's knowledge of anatomy was essential for the sacred art of mummification. He entered the cool limestone chambers where the bodies of the departed were prepared for their journey to the field of reeds. He worked alongside the embalmers, identifying the internal organs as they were carefully removed and placed into canopic jars. He studied the livers, the lungs, and the kidneys of the deceased, looking for the physical traces of the diseases that had taken them. Every body was a final lesson, a map of a life struggle against the unseen forces of decay. He saw the scars of old infections, the black soot of the city in the lungs, and the worn joints of those who had labored in the fields. This work was not gruesome to him, it was a profound act of respect for the temple of the human soul. By understanding how the body failed in death, he believed he could better understand how to preserve it in life. The flickering oil lamps cast long, dancing shadows against the walls covered in funerary spells and protective deities. In this place, the boundary between the physical and the spiritual felt as thin as a piece of fine linen. He offered a silent prayer for the souls of those on his table, wishing them a safe passage through the halls of Osiris. He then washed his hands thoroughly in natron water, a ritual of purification that closed the door between the dead and the living. Part 7. The Alchemist of the Night. Returning to his small home, Imhotep lit a single lamp, its flame casting a warm golden glow over his collection of scrolls. The city outside was settling into a heavy desert silence, broken only by the occasional bark of a jackal in the distance. This was his time for Hekau, the sacred words of power that accompanied the physical administration of medicine. In ancient Egypt, a doctor was not merely a scientist, but a magician who understood that words carried their own vibration. He spent the late evening hours writing new observations onto a fresh roll of papyrus, his reed pen scratching softly in the quiet. He recorded the steward's heart symptoms, noting the effect of the foxglove tea on the rhythm of his pulse. He described the way the honey had kept the mason's wound clean, reaffirming his belief in the sun's power trapped in the nectar. He also pondered the mysteries that he could not yet solve, the pestilence of the year that struck without warning or reason. He knew there were limits to his wisdom, boundaries that even the most learned swan could not cross. He thought of the many children who did not survive their first summer, their lives snuffed out by fevers that no herb could cool. He thought of the great kings whose monumental tombs were already rising on the Giza plateau, yet who were as vulnerable to a snake bite as any slave. In the darkness, he felt the presence of the gods more keenly, a vast and indifferent power that moved the stars and flooded the Nile. He took a small piece of malachite and ground it into a fine green powder, preparing a protective eye paint for the next day. The kohl was not just for beauty, it protected the eyes from the glare of Ra and the infections carried by the desert flies. Every action, from the most complex surgery to the simplest application of makeup, was an act of preservation, is less than Hasson. Zero hash is greater than. He felt a deep, abiding connection to the healers who had come before him, those whose names were forgotten, but whose wisdom remained. He was a single link in a golden chain of knowledge that stretched back to the beginning of time. His eyes grew heavy, the weight of the day's burdens finally pulling at his spirit, yet he felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. He had stood between his patience and the darkness for another day, providing comfort where he could and clarity where there was confusion. Part 8. Reflections Under the Stars. Before finally surrendering to sleep, Imhotep stepped out onto the flat roof of his dwelling to look at the night sky. The stars were brilliant diamonds scattered across the velvet cloak of Nut, the sky goddess. He looked toward the imperishable stars in the north, the ones that never set, where the souls of the justified were said to dwell. He thought of his own journey, of the many years he had spent studying the pulse and the breath, the blood and the bone. He realized that a day in the life of a doctor was not a battle to be won, but a balance to be maintained. The Nile would flood, and the Nile would recede. The sun would rise, and the sun would set. So too would the body grow strong and eventually wither, returning to the earth from which it was fashioned. His role was to ensure that the transition was made with as little pain as possible, and with the dignity befitting a creation of the gods. He took a deep breath of the cool night air, the scent of the river now dominant and refreshing. The city of Memphis slept around him, thousands of souls dreaming under the watchful eyes of the temple guardians. Tomorrow the sun would return, and with it the long line of the sick, the injured, and the weary. He would rise again, wash in the sacred water, and take up his bronze tools once more. For as long as there was breath in his lungs, he would be a servant of life, a seeker of wisdom, and a guardian of the house of life. He closed his eyes, the image of the flickering campfire of his own existence glowing brightly in the center of his mind. The story of the healer is never truly finished. It is simply passed from one hand to another, like a sacred flame in the dark. And so, the physician slept, his dreams filled with the whispers of the papyrus and the steady, rhythmic beat of the heart of Egypt. Part 9. The Shadow of the Delta Plague. The desert night was never truly silent for those who knew how to listen. As Imhotep sat in the flickering light, a sudden, urgent pounding echoed from the street level of his home. It was a sound he had learned to dread over the decades, the sound of a crisis that could not wait for the sun. He descended the stairs to find a soldier of the pharaoh's guard, his face masked with a cloth soaked in vinegar. "The pestilence has arrived from the northern marshes," the soldier whispered, his voice cracking with exhaustion. A mysterious fever was sweeping through the garrison at the edge of the delta, turning strong men into shaking shadows within hours. Imhotep did not hesitate. He grabbed his emergency kit, a leather bag filled with his most potent antiseptics and protective amulets. As they rode toward the outskirts of the city, the air grew thick with the smell of burning cedar and sulfur. The Egyptians knew that foul air, or miasma, was a carrier of the invisible demons of disease. They reached a makeshift isolation camp where dozens of men lay on reed mats, their skin covered in angry red blotches. This was the Asiatic sickness, a plague that defied the usual logic of the House of Life. Imhotep moved among the dying, his eyes sharp as he looked for a pattern in the chaos of the symptoms. He realized that the traditional herbs were failing because this was a sickness of the blood and the breath combined. He ordered the fires to be stoked higher, adding dried hyssop and juniper berries to the flames to scrub the air. He administered a new experimental brew made from the moldy crusts of barley bread soaked in wine. He had noticed, through years of quiet observation, that certain molds had the power to fight the invisible rot that took hold of wounds. While he did not understand the science of penicillin, his intuition led him to the threshold of a great discovery. He spent the dark hours of the night lancing boils and washing the soldier's burning skin with cooling natron solutions. Many died in his arms, their final breaths a plea to gods who seemed far away in the face of such a relentless enemy. But for every 5 who perished, one began to show the first signs of a breaking fever. In the heart of the plague camp, Imhotep was a general in a war without swords, fighting an enemy that could not be seen or bargained with. He felt the crushing weight of his mortality, yet he stood firm, a beacon of order in a world of biological collapse. Part 10. The Secret Remedies of the Temple. As the first hint of grey light appeared in the east, the plague's immediate fury seemed to wane, leaving a hollow silence. Imhotep, covered in the dust and sweat of the struggle, returned to a hidden sanctuary within the House of Life. There were certain remedies that were never written on the public scrolls, kept secret even from the junior apprentices. These were the spells of the sun and moon, treatments reserved for when all earthly logic had been exhausted. He entered a room where the walls were covered in deep blue lapis lazuli, reflecting a strange, ethereal light. Here, they kept the milk of the poppy in its purest form, and jars of star-metal dust-ground meteorites believed to contain the essence of the heavens. He prepared a poultice using these celestial ingredients, intended for a priest who had been bitten by a sacred cobra. The venom of the cobra was a divine fire that could only be countered by the coldest elements of the earth. He mixed the meteorite dust with the milk of a black cow and the juice of a specific desert lily that bloomed only at midnight. As he applied the paste to the priest's blackened limb, he chanted the secret names of Ra, words that were said to vibrate the very fabric of reality. He felt a strange tingling in his own hands, a sense that he was tapping into a power far older than the city of Memphis itself. This was the intersection of the doctor and the high priest, where the physical body was treated as a spiritual vessel. The priest's breathing, which had been shallow and ragged, began to deepen and steady. The swelling of the limbs seemed to recede, as if the poison were being drawn out by the magnetic pull of the stardust. Imhotep watched in silent awe, reminded that the universe held secrets that no papyrus could ever fully capture. He knew that some would call this magic, but to him it was simply a deeper, more refined level of nature. It was the knowledge that everything in the world, from the stones to the stars, was connected by an invisible thread of life. By pulling on that thread, he could sometimes mend the tears in a human life. But he also knew the cost. Such rituals drained the soul, leaving the healer as fragile as the patient. He slumped against the cold stone wall, his strength finally failing him as the sun Ra prepared to make his grand entrance. Part 11. The Anatomy of a Soul. Before the day truly began, Imhotep took a moment to visit the Room of the Scribes one last time. He needed to record the events of the plague camp and the success of the stardust poultice. He knew that his time on this earth was growing short, and his legacy would be these scrolls of scorched papyrus. He wrote of the importance of the moldy bread, urging future healers not to dismiss the lowly rot of the earth. He wrote of the soldiers' vinegar masks, theorizing that the sharp scent could block the demons of the air. His hand trembled slightly as he drew the hieroglyph for life, the Ankh, at the end of his record. He realized that his entire life had been a study of that single symbol, a quest to understand its true meaning. It was not just the absence of death, but the presence of a vibrant, balanced harmony between the mind and the flesh. He thought of the many faces he had seen during this single day, the mason, the weaver, the steward, and the dying soldiers. Each one was a verse in a long epic poem of human endurance, a poem that he was privileged to read. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for his calling, despite the blood, the filth, and the frequent heartbreak. To be a doctor in Egypt was to walk between the sun and the shadows, always reaching for the light. He finished the scroll and sealed it with his personal signet ring, a small beetle carved from green jasper. The beetle, the scarab, was the symbol of transformation and rebirth, the ultimate goal of all healing. As he stepped out into the morning light, he felt a strange sense of lightness, as if the burdens of the day had been lifted. The cycle was beginning again, the eternal rhythm of the Nile and the sun, and he was ready to play his part once more. He was Imhotep, the one who knows, and for one more day he would hold the darkness at bay. I will now weave the final chapters of this journey. We are heading into the most restricted areas of the Egyptian world, the royal court, and finally, the transition into the legacy of the healer. This section will add the final 9,000 characters, bringing our total to the 35,000 character target. Part 12. The Secret Chambers of the Pharaoh. The sun was high in the sky, casting no shadows, when the ultimate summons arrived. Gold-clad messengers from the Per-Ah, the Great House, the pharaoh himself, entered the temple grounds. Imhotep was ushered through the colossal gates of the royal palace, a place where even the air felt heavier with the scent of power. He was led past the great sphinxes and into a chamber cooled by massive fans of ostrich feathers. On a throne of solid gold sat the living god, the pharaoh, whose health was the health of Egypt itself. The pharaoh did not speak. His chief advisor whispered that the king had been plagued by dark dreams and a persistent dry cough. Imhotep understood that this was more than a physical ailment. It was the weight of a kingdom pressing upon a single man. He did not approach the pharaoh as a subject, but as a bridge between the mortal and the divine. He examined the king's eyes, noting the slight yellowing that suggested the liver was struggling under the burden of rich palace life. He prescribed a cleanse of the Nile, a week of drinking only purified water infused with the petals of the blue lotus. He also prepared a special amulet made of hematite, carved with the eye of Horus, to be worn over the heart. "The king's strength is the river's strength," Imhotep murmured, "but even the river must sometimes rest in the marshes." He spoke of the balance between the Ka, the life force, and the Ba, the soul, and how they must be aligned for the body to heal. The pharaoh nodded almost imperceptibly, a sign that the physician's wisdom had reached the man behind the mask of divinity. In that moment, Imhotep realized the true nature of his craft. It was the art of maintaining the stability of a civilization. By healing the king, he was healing the land. By calming the king's breath, he was calming the heart of the world. He left the palace as the shadows began to stretch again, the weight of the royal secret tucked away in the folds of his linen kilt. He was a keeper of the balance, a man who moved between the mud of the streets and the gold of the throne with equal grace. Part 13. The Wisdom of the Ages. Back at the House of Life, the evening stars began to shimmer over the palm trees once more. Imhotep felt a profound sense of completion, as if the threads of his long life were finally being woven into a finished tapestry. He gathered his senior apprentices one last time, sitting with them in the cool, quiet courtyard of the library. "Do not look only at the wound," he told them, his voice a low, rhythmic rasp that commanded absolute silence. "Look at the man, look at his family, and look at the star under which he was born." He explained that a doctor who only knows herbs is but a cook, a doctor who only knows spells is but a dreamer. But a doctor who knows both and understands the heart is a true soir, a master of the great mystery. He handed his personal bronze lancet to the youngest and most promising of the students, a girl whose hands were as steady as stone. "Your journey is just beginning," he whispered, "while mine is nearing the western horizon." He spent his final hours of the night reviewing the scrolls of his predecessors, adding his own final notes in the margins. He wrote of the secret of the pulse, describing how the heart speaks through the vessels to every part of the body. He was thousands of years ahead of his time, sensing the circulation of blood before the world had a name for it. His pen moved with a frantic yet precise energy, as if he were trying to pour his entire soul into the ink. He knew that these scrolls would outlast the pyramids, for knowledge is the only thing that the desert sands cannot swallow. He felt the presence of Thoth beside him, the ibis-headed god guiding his hand through the final hieroglyphs of his life's work. Part 14. The Final Ascent. The Closing. The fire of our own night is now dying down, leaving only the glowing heart of the coals. Imhotep's day has come to its natural end, and the Sun-Ra prepares for his nightly journey through the underworld. The physician returned to his roof, his body finally surrendering to the overwhelming pull of the earth. He lay back and watched the stars, the same stars that had watched over the first builders of the Great Pyramids. He felt a deep peace, the peace of a man who has done his duty and kept his oath to the House of Life. He had seen the beginning of life in the birthroom and the end of life in the embalming chamber. He had served the beggar and the king, the weaver and the warrior, with the same steady hand and open heart. The story of the Egyptian doctor is a story of the human spirit's refusal to surrender to the darkness of ignorance. They were the first to map the body, the first to categorize the herbs, and the first to realize that healing is a sacred art. We walk in their footsteps every time we look for a cure, every time we seek to understand the mysteries of our own flesh. The legacy of Imhotep lives on in every hospital, in every pharmacy, and in every quiet moment of a healer's care. Thank you for joining me by the fire tonight at Campfire Night Stories for this journey into the golden sands of the past. If this glimpse into the ancient world has stirred your soul, please remember to like this video and subscribe to our circle. Your presence keeps our fire burning, allowing us to tell the tales that history almost forgot. As the embers fade and the shadows reclaim the forest, I wish you a night of deep and healing sleep. May the gods of the Nile watch over your dreams, and may you wake to a dawn as bright as the Egyptian sun. Good night, seekers of wisdom. The fire is out. The night is yours.